Hello and welcome to the first episode of Sci Cam. This is a science show where we're going to tell you about what's going on in the web. First episode of Sci Cam. We're going to tell you what's going on in Cambridge, and we are going to talk about some different aspects of science. I'm Michael Conterio, and with me tonight there's Hayley Frend and Sonja Dunbar. But we're going to start off with an interview with Andrew Goldman, who's joining me here today, who is talking. I'm going to be talking about music and creativity. So, Andrew, what is the main thing that you're working on in your PhD?
Hi, so my name is Andrew Goldman. I'm a PhD student at the Center for Music and Science in the Faculty of Music. I'm a pianist and an improviser and a classical pianist. And my background is in neuroscience, and I've come to Cambridge to research the cognition of musical improvisation. So I'm interested in how people are able to improvise, how improvisers perceive music, how they produce music, and how they do what they do, which is typically considered to be a creative act. And in this sense, I try to describe creativity from a cognitive scientific point of view.
Okay. So what's the main theory that you've been working on over the course of your PhD? What is it that allows people to be creative?
Well, I begin with the observation that there seem to be at least two kinds of musicians. That is to say that some musicians suggest that they're able to improvise, and some musicians say, I can't improvise. And this seems to be a distinction that people identify in themselves. And in some sense, this is socially constructed, but I think that there is a real difference in the way that these different musicians know how to play music. I think that their understanding of music is different. I accept that some of this is just the way that people talk about what they do, but I think that there are real differences in the way that they understand music. So what my research is trying to do is to categorize different approaches to learning music and how this may be reflected in particular kinds of cognitive tasks. So to answer your question more directly in terms of a theoretical framework, I'm very interested in theories of mental imagery as well as motor theories of perception.
Okay, so motor theories, that's the idea that people are thinking about doing things and actually thinking about how they're going to do it before they do it.
Mm-hmm. So motor theories of perception are something that are quite pervasive through many areas of cognitive science. One of the main areas of research to support these theories is actually studies on musicians. And so the idea being that actions, the ability to code an action or to know how to do an action, part of what it means to know how to make a particular movement is to be able to anticipate the sensory consequences of that movement.
So what do you mean by sensory consequences? How that action is going to feel when you're actually going to do it?
Or sound, or look like.
Okay, so all of the senses then?
I don't know if it applies to olfaction or taste. That's interesting, but certainly it's been demonstrated in vision and audition, and as well as in various proprioceptive. So in other words, knowing where your body is, knowing what it's going to feel like to move in that position. And so when people learn how to play music, when they learn how to play an instrument, part of what this means is that they learn these kinds of associations between how to move and what it's going to sound like. But I think that it's in this domain that we can start to demonstrate differences between the improvisatory understanding of music and the so-called non-improvisatory one.
So do people who can improv music, are they just better at thinking about what different things are going to sound like and feel like when they're making emotions?
I'm not sure exactly what the nature of the difference is going to be. It could be that they're faster at certain things. It could be that they have more vivid mental imagery. Anyway, these are all empirical questions, and they're empirically tractable questions. And that's one of the projects I'm working on now is attempting to see, well, what kinds of differences can we see in their ability to generate these images and to link them with appropriate movements. It seems to be something that's crucial to be able to improvise. I did a previous experiment where I asked improvisers to play in unfamiliar motor contexts. That is to say, I had pianists play in unfamiliar keys, which changes the way that the keyboard feels, and it doesn't allow them as much to rely on like muscle memory.
So they're going to have to be putting their hands in completely different positions to the ones that they're used to when improvising.
Right. In order to play what would otherwise be the same thing musically, they would have to move in different positions. And when they're in this situation, they say that they can hear what they want to play, that is, they can imagine what they want to play, but they're not able to play it. So they can't make that link from the image to the motion. And that's something that in other contexts, familiar contexts, they would be able to do. But I think that that's something that's crucial to be able to improvise, is to have these links. And it's something that musicians who don't have experience improvising, or who haven't learned to play music in this improvisatory way, may not have this kind of link, or maybe a less efficient link, or a less vivid link. I'm not exactly sure what the difference would be, but that's the domain where yeah, that's how I'm asking questions.
So what are you hoping at the end of this? Are you hoping that perhaps knowing how people can improvise, you'll actually be able to like give people better exercises and teach them to improvise, teach them to actually have those vivid images in their brain before they actually play the piano or whatever instrument?
Sure. I mean, this is a question of application, I suppose. I mean, this is something that is particularly, I think, well, I imagine that most researchers think about this kind of a question. I find myself in a music faculty, not in a psychology or cognitive science faculty, and so the way that I approach this question is perhaps different than maybe other scientists might, which is to say that I'm not sure what kind of technical, commercial, physical application this might have. To me, it's a way of understanding what it means to improvise, what improvisation is, and I think that that has value in itself. That being said, this kind of research and understanding about how these cognitive theories work, it's difficult to anticipate what kind of applications they can have, but I can say that if we change and develop the way we understand the mind, it will open possibilities for things we'll be able to imagine, like we do. Blue Skies research.
We're all for Blue Skies research here on Sci Cam. And if you've got any questions that you would like to ask Andrew, you can submit them via the YouTube video or via the comments on Google+. And we'll get back to that later on in the show. But now it's time for Hayley to explain to us a paper in plain English. Hayley.
We have discovered the secret of life. That's what Watson and Crick reportedly said when they walked into the Eagle pub in Cambridge. They had discovered the structure of DNA. This is the molecules that make up our genes and act as our body's instruction books. Now, we've come a long way since Watson and Crick's discovery, but many questions still remain. For example, if every single one of our cells receive a copy of this instruction book, how does a cell know to become a skin cell rather than a heart cell, for instance? And how do the cells adapt to the environment they find themselves in and respond to external cues? Well, the answer to all of these questions is epigenetics. Now, epigenetics is the study of heritable changes to our genes that are not encoded by our DNA. They are molecular tags which affect how the DNA is read, like if I highlighted or crossed out certain bits of that instruction book. Now, to use an analogy, if your mother was brutally attacked by a hamster when she was a child, she may well spend much of your childhood warning you against the dangers of a hamster, and you may well always ensure to keep a safe distance from hamsters. In other words, you would have changed your behaviour because of something she experienced. And this works on a molecular level too. So the environment the cell finds itself in may change its epigenome, and this can be passed on to descendants of the cells, and even through generations of people. So this paper, recently published by Miriam Hemberger at the University of Cambridge, offers some further insights into the field of epigenetics. Now, Miriam Hemberger looked at the 4 very powerful types of stem cell that are present in the very early embryo. And she found that of these 4 cell types, the epigenetic modifications or methylation marks were different for each type of cell. And this was dependent not only on the developmental stage of the cell, but on the power of the stem cell. And by power, I mean the ability of the cell to turn into different cell types. It is possible to take someone's skin cells, their mature skin cells, and by flicking on certain genes, turn these into immature, powerful stem cells. By flicking on a different subset of genes, you can cause these powerful stem cells to turn into a different tissue type, for example, spinal cord. In this way, you could theoretically cure a spinal cord injury with the person's own skin cells. Now, although we're making great advances in this technology, it's still very inefficient and poorly understood. We clearly don't have the whole picture, and epigenetics may play a role in completing this story. If we understand the epigenetic marks on the stem cells, on the powerful stem cells in the very early embryo in real life, we have a better chance of creating these cells in therapy and controlling them. So, although Watson and Crick may have discovered a secret of life, it seems Mother Nature had many more up her sleeve.
Thank you very much for that, Hayley. Remember, if you've got any comments that you would like to, any questions that you would like to ask Andrew about improv in music, then you can get those in either via YouTube or via Google+. But now we're going to go over to Sonja. Oh, and apologies for the slight problem we had with the sound there. That's hopefully all fixed now. But now we're going to go over to Sonja Dunbar, who has a chemistry experiment ready and going for us. Hello, Sonja.
Hello. So, in this episode, I'm going to be showing you how to do an experiment that will nicely demonstrate density using things that you can find in your kitchen. And you need a couple of things for this. First of all, you'll need some sugar. You'll need some water to make the solutions. You'll need some cups to hold those solutions in. A spoon, obviously, to mix them. Some sort of tall, thin container. I'll be using a small tube, but a tall, thin glass or a vase should do. And most importantly, a pipette. Now then, one other thing that I'll be using as well is some food colouring, because sugar and water solutions are all clear, so you wouldn't be able to see the different layers without them. So then, while the rest of the show has been going on, I made the first solution that I'll be using to save a bit of time, but I'll show you how to make the next one. So, I've got a cup, and I'll be adding a small amount of sugar and some water to this one. So in the first one, the red one, I added a heaped teaspoon of sugar. So I want to add a bit less to the second one, because I want this one to be less dense. Now, importantly, I need to put the same amount of water, near enough, in this second one, and stir until I can't see the sugar anymore. It's going to make a bit of a sound, sorry to the microphone. While I just make sure that dissolves, it's really important to keep the amount of water in each cup the same. And the reason for that is that what we're trying to see here, density, is defined as the mass, that's how many atoms there are per unit volume, so how much space those atoms are taking up. And by changing the amount of sugar in the glass, we change the amount of atoms, the amount of molecules that are in the same volume. So we know that the density's changed this way. And we should know, therefore, that the solution with more sugar, which is this one, because I put a whole heaped teaspoon in that one, will be more dense than the one I just made up, which you should have seen I didn't put quite so much sugar in. Now then, there is a quick note if you're trying this at home. Part of the reason I made this one up earlier was because if you dissolve a very large amount of sugar in water, sometimes you'll need to heat the water a little bit to make all the sugar dissolve. But we're ready to go. So you want to put the most dense solution at the bottom. So I'm just using the pipette quickly to put a layer of this, but I could have poured it because there are no other solutions in here at the moment. There we go. So you should be able to see a nice red layer there. Excellent. Now then, the next bit is the tricky bit. So this is why you have the pipette, because you need to be able to put the next solution on really slowly. So, I got some of the blue solution. And you need to put the tip of the pipette, or whatever you're using, you might be able to pour it slowly across the back of a spoon, just above the surface of the red. You might be able to see on the camera, but I don't think you can. It's going in at first. But in a moment, if I keep this up, you should start to see a nice blue layer forming. I just put a bit of white behind it. You might be able to see just now that blue layer just starting on the top. It'll become really visible when I've built up the layer, but that's going to take a little bit of time. So in the meantime, so that you guys don't just have to watch me sitting here dripping drips into a tube, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what this is showing and what density, well, looks like in the real world. Because the natural world's got some great examples of density in action. So first of all, for example, if you went swimming, or various mammals and things that live underwater, when you breathe out, when they breathe out, you form, to blow bubbles that is, they rise to the surface. Not always in a straight line, but they get there eventually. They always rise. And that's because you're breathing out a gas. And gases, in general, are less dense than the liquids. Particularly air is less dense than water. So, there we go, we're getting quite a nice layer going on there. Equally, when we're swimming, we have to keep moving, otherwise we'd sink, because solids are in general more dense, so they would sink. I didn't completely ruin that, that's quite important. So just as a note, what happens if you don't do this really slowly and carefully and don't pay attention, is that these sugar solutions will mix, and because they're just solutions of sugar, they will actually just mix and they won't come on, they won't separate out again. However, we're getting a nice layer there. If I just hold the paper up and hold it a little closer to the camera, you should be able to see. We have a nice layer of a less dense solution floating above the more dense one. So I was just talking about things floating on water or sinking in water. A few of you might be thinking about solid water, that is ice, and the fact that it floats on water when I've just told you that solids normally sink. Now this is because water is actually pretty special. It's a remarkable combination. It's got 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and well, the way they interact when liquid water freezes to become solid is actually that they spread out. So do you remember how I was saying how many molecules per that unit volume? Because the water spreads out, it becomes less dense as a solid than it is as a liquid. That's actually a really useful property. It means that ice floats, for example, on the top of ponds, so things can live underneath. But any of you who've had a burst water pipe in the winter due to ice expanding as it's frozen probably don't think that's quite so useful. So I actually have one of these that I made up earlier, because if you want to make up several solutions, which I didn't for the purpose of you not having to watch me dripping sugar all the time, you can actually get more and more layers. So I've got 3 here, you should be able to see, red, blue and green. And obviously, so more dense, so this is the most dense, hopping up to the middle, hopping up to the least dense. So here we have it. That's density in colourful action. And it's actually not just a pretty demo. Biologists, like myself, use sugar gradients to help separate parts of cells. Those are the building blocks of living creatures, so that we can investigate them. So there you have it. Everything you need to try it is in your kitchen, so go and have a go. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you very much for that demonstration, Sonja. We're going to move on to our final segment of the show, and we've got Sam Gregson, who works at CERN, which is very exciting, and I'm a physicist as well, so I like the particle physics, and he's here to give a beginner's guide to the world of particle physics. Take it away, Sam.
Hello there, can you hear me, Michael?
We can indeed.
Okay, so yes, I'll just give you a quick introduction into particle physics. This is a very exciting time for particle physics. I'm sure all of you have heard a little bit about the commissioning of the Large Hadron Collider, and this is allowing us analysts to look at physics phenomena at previously unrealized energy scales. So it's a very exciting time. So let's start at the start. I mean, what is particle physics? You've heard a little bit about it. Well, imagine that you get a jigsaw puzzle for Christmas, and there are two things that you need to complete that puzzle. First of all, you need the jigsaw pieces themselves, and then second of all, you need the instructions on how to put them together. You need the picture that's on the box. Now, if you're missing either of those, it becomes virtually impossible to complete the puzzle. Now, particle physics is basically the study of the universe's jigsaw puzzle. It's a study of the elementary units that comprise everything in the cosmos, that's the particles, and how they interact and behave, and that's the physics, hence particle physics. So, the idea is that if you could understand everything about how the particles interact and behave, you could essentially understand physics on any scale, be that from the very small or up to the scale of stars and galaxies and beyond. So the study of particle physics is essentially a search for the very nature of the universe in which we live. So what are these elementary building blocks? Well, you can break them down into three distinct sections, and you can summarize these in what we call the Standard Model, which is the overarching theoretical background of particle physics and has been for the last several decades. So what I will do is I'll show you a slide which helps to give an overview of the Standard Model. Can we see that slide? Yes. Okay. So the three distinct sections that we have are the quarks, the leptons, and the force carriers or vector bosons. So quarks can be combined into packages of 2 or 3 to produce new particles. For example, I'm sure most of you will have heard of protons and neutrons, which make up the nuclei of all the atoms around us. And these are simply combinations of up and down quarks, the quarks in the first generation there in the diagram. Leptons include the familiar electron and neutrinos, which do not travel faster than light, despite recent claims to the contrary. And the quarks and leptons come in 3 families or generations. And these generations are completely kind of identical copies of each other, apart from the particles become more massive as you move from left to right in the diagram. And that's the only difference really between those different generations. They become progressively more massive. Now, according to Einstein's famous equation, energy is the speed of light squared, E equals mc squared. So producing the heavier particles of higher mass requires greater energy input. So the generations moving towards the right were discovered progressively later as collider experiments became more powerful. The final section is the vector bosons. These are the force carriers. So what you might not know is that particles actually interact by exchanging vector bosons. For example, the electromagnetic force, like 2 like magnet poles repelling, is just a result of the exchange of floods of photons, a vector boson, between the 2 poles. So the exchange of force carriers allows us to explain action at a distance, for example, how the Earth feels the sun's gravitational pull. And in elementary particle physics, there are 4 forces that we need to be familiar with. There's the electromagnetic force, mediated by the photon, as I've just mentioned. There's the strong force, which binds together protons and neutrons in the nuclei of atoms, which is mediated by the gluon. There's the weak force, which is responsible for changing the type or flavor of particles, which is mediated by the W and Z bosons. And then there's gravity, which is mediated by the graviton. So you can see all these particles neatly laid out in the Standard Model. And the one remaining particle to discuss is the infamous Higgs boson, which I'm sure we've all heard a little bit about recently. I'll just get rid of the slide now and come back. So the Higgs boson is the particle which was responsible for giving all other particles their mass. So particle physics theory states that there's an invisible Higgs field which permeates all of space. An interaction of particles with the Higgs fields causes them to feel a drag, like a bullet fired through water, and then they acquire mass. And the Higgs boson is a telltale sign that this field exists. And recent data from ATLAS and CMS at CERN at the Large Hadron Collider has indicated that a Higgs boson type particle has been discovered, which would essentially complete our picture of the Standard Model, although final confirmation of this is still required. So now we've kind of laid out the players, we've laid out the pieces in our jigsaw. It should be noted that the Standard Model has stood up to every experimental challenge for several decades. So this is a really high precision theory. And precision particle physics measurements at many colliders and scores of experiments are yet to yield results that are kind of out of line with its predictions. But the problem is the Standard Model cannot be the complete picture because there are several unanswered questions in particle physics that have many varied and far-reaching implications for our understanding of the state and evolution of the universe. With that in mind, the Large Hadron Collider, which is a high-energy proton-proton collider located at CERN in Geneva in Switzerland, recently began its operation. And there are 4 main experiments at the LHC, each designed to shed light on these unresolved issues. There's ATLAS, CMS, LHCb, and ALICE. Now, ATLAS and CMS are multi-purpose detectors, and they're basically designed, or they were focused on looking for the Higgs Boson, which has hopefully recently been discovered. But they're also flexible enough to search for many types of beyond standard model physics. For example, exciting prospects such as supersymmetry or extra hidden spatial dimensions, which might sound like something of Star Trek, but is actually something potentially very real. LHCb, the Large Hadron Collider Beauty experiment, which I have the pleasure of being an analyst on, is designed to look for charge parity or CP violation and look at the differences between particles and antiparticles, hopefully looking for clues as to why the universe around us consists of what it does, a small amount of matter and lots of light. So this experiment could potentially have large implications for our understanding of the evolution of the universe. And the remaining experiment, ALICE, studies the collision of lead atoms and is designed to infer information about the conditions that existed in the universe just after the Big Bang. So these experiments are really looking at the real questions of how our universe evolved and why it behaves as it does nowadays. So some really far-reaching questions with great implications for the universe in which we live. So there's many active topics in particle physics, a very active, vibrant, and fascinating field. And it's rightly receiving its kind of fair share of media attention at the moment. And the next few years should be extremely exciting time in the field. And hopefully, in the shows that come, I'll get a little bit more chance to tell you more about it.
Thank you very much there, Sam. And that's all we've got time for on this first issue of Sci Cam. So thank you to everyone who's been involved, Hayley, Sam, Sonja, and of course our guest this time, Andrew, who came all the way out here to explain about creativity. And thank you very much to Will Thompson, who's been our cameraman for today, flicking between us capably. So thank you very much. We're going to be back again sometime in November with another show. So you can follow Sci Cam on Google+ or on Facebook, or sign up for the Cambridge University Outreach Network mailing list to find out when that's going to be. I hope you've enjoyed your time here. I hope you've learned something, and hopefully see you next time. Bye-bye.